The Spot Track Podcast, talking sports contracts, the salary cap, and business of sports.
Welcome to another edition of the Spot Track Podcast. My name is Mike Ginnitti. It is Monday, June 5th. Waking up from Game 2 of the NBA Finals. We're going to start there. We're going to bounce around quite a bit today. 4 or 5 different avenues, different channels, sort of a weekend recap. Plenty of money talk out there. We got an NFL contract to break down. We have some quarterback movements to talk about. I'm going to talk Oakland A's because I feel like they're being lost in translation right now, maybe literally and metaphorically. And a little golf. Recap what we saw this weekend at the Memorial. But as promised here, the NBA is all locked up. I generally stay away from the analysis side of things because there are millions and millions of channels for that out there. But I've been watching this season so closely, and honestly, this Heat team so closely. I'm going to get to a couple of odds, but I want to comment on Erik Spoelstra's comments after the game. Got a little testy, and I have a feeling that this is not something that's going to be said too much today, but I want to get it out into the stratosphere because strategically, and I have a feeling that's all Erik Spoelstra knows, right, is this guy's a grinder, just an absolute X and O nerd, a matchup nerd, an analysis analytical nerd. And look, he's going to walk into the Hall of Fame because of it. So he was asked about Jokic and the success rate that they feel like they may have had in limiting his playmaking yesterday versus 41 points. And essentially what kind of outcome he thinks that got. And is that something they can stick with? And he basically shot back and said, look, the plan was, he got testy into the point of saying, there is no stopping this player. He's a great player, blah, blah, blah. Here's where I think his head was. I mean, if you watch that game closely, and I'm sure you have, if you're an NBA fan, and if you watch this series closely, and if you've watched the Heat closely for the past 2 months now in this postseason, the difference yesterday, and I said this to myself maybe 4 or 5 times throughout the game, what appears to be happening from an offensive standpoint is that Erik Spoelstra is asking Bam Adebayo to be Jokic, to stand at the top of the key, to stand at the top of the three-point line and facilitate the offense, whether it's 2v2, whether it's off a pick and roll, whether it's straight take the ball to the hoop, whether it's pop and stop. There's a hell of a lot going on through Bam, not through Jimmy, not through Kyle Lowry, not through any of the traditional ball handlers on that team, which is how Denver runs their offense. Now, there is no A-B comparison between those two players. I think Bam has taken massive steps forward offensively in the past few months here. I think he's being asked to do so from a game plan standpoint. And I have a feeling that the plan is to fight fire with fire, not so much stop Jokic. Build a team that looks like that with whatever roster they have available, and that's not a pound for pound roster comparison right now. But it worked yesterday. It worked. It forced the Joker to come out to that 3-point line. It allowed Duncan Robinson and Jimmy Butler and those likes to slash and get fouled and accumulate frustration with Denver. So I think the angst that Erik Spoelstra has isn't, we did a hell of a job stopping the Joker. They didn't. Okay. The fact that the Joker had 3 or whatever, 5 assists yesterday might have just been an anomaly. It might have been they frustrated the hell out of that guy. And I would say from a defensive standpoint, from a foul standpoint, from a gameplay standpoint, and it turned him into that kid on the playground you hate that was just putting his head down and going to the hoop or putting his head down and saying, my ball, my shot, which is not what he is. So instead of saying defensively we matched up against him, I don't believe that's the case. I believe Erik Spoelstra outcoached the hell out of that game yesterday with Denver's philosophy and using Bam Adebayo as the linchpin. And I think that's something sustainable. Now, are they going to continue to hit those threes at that rate? No, 52%, ridiculous. Are they going to frustrate Denver every game? Probably not. That's the only change Michael Malone has to make going forward. Okay. We just have to keep our composure, and they cannot beat us. They damn near didn't beat them yesterday, even really kind of matching up against them pound for pound. That's how good Denver is. That's how deep Denver is. Michael Porter Jr. hits 1-3 yesterday. This game's different, obviously. So I don't think it's a slam dunk. But with that said, Miami's still plus 225 right now to win this series. Is there ever a team that you think at least has an inkling of a chance more than this Miami team? Every single way down the path, they've been massive underdogs. They've been blown out here and there, like in game one, and they've crawled right back into it. Now, can they get to the finish line here? I don't know. But if you've got some house money or some promo money sitting in your DraftKings account right now, I'd throw some promo money on plus 225 from Miami, because if any team's going to do it, it's this team with that coach. Again, the roster comparison isn't fair. Okay, it's A to Z right now. But there's a couple of guys out there, and there's enough guys that if they get hot like they did last night, enough, they're sustainable. And that coach is not going to let them falter. So I think that this is less about Eric Spoelstra being a dick to the media, because I don't think that's a norm for him. And I think it's more about, we're sick of talking about Denver. Okay. We just played Denver's game and beat him. And he's looking for a little respect out there. And certainly last night he deserves it. So again, a little bit of a off-base analysis for me from a coaching standpoint, from a structural standpoint. It's also a betting conversation. That's a team I'm betting on right there, all right? Because I believe that took a hell of a lot of balls last night to go out there and use Bam Adebayo in the Joker role and beat them at their own game. I don't know if it's sustainable. I think Denver's a much, much better roster, but I would throw some promo money on that and run with it. Speaking of which, the current NBA Finals MVP odds, of course, it's Jokic still, the minus 230 favorite. Jimmy Butler's a plus 450. He doesn't look like he's going to have that kind of role. Bam's plus 500. There's a world. There's certainly a world. If there's 3 more games like we saw last night where he's facilitating the offense and making an impact defensively at the rim, right? If he's got 120 rebound game in him coming up here, he's going to be in this conversation. Now, plus 500 is not the best odds in the world, but if you're looking for plus, that's a plus. Jamal Murray plus 3,500. He's 2 up and down right now. And then Gabe Vincent plus 4,000. Those are your at least attainable options right now. There's a conversation to be had here if you want to throw some money on Miami. There's no question about it. And 5-1 on Bam is at least worth, again, a couple of promo dollars to wet your belt there a little bit. Okay, that's it. I'm going to just continue to watch and enjoy and not try to break down too much game tape because, like I said, there are plenty of channels for that out there. But just wanted to respond to a lot I've been hearing from last night and this morning. And that's my 2 cents in terms of where this thing might be headed. Another NFL contract in our books here. It is Ed Oliver with the Buffalo Bills, the defensive tackle, former first-round pick. It's a big day for the Bills. Groundbreaking the new stadium, announcing retained naming rights for that stadium, signing Leonard Floyd away from the Rams on a 1-year contract, officially signing Ed Oliver to this 4-year extension. Josh Allen may be announced as the Madden 2024 cover, which is probably not good news for Bills fans if you understand what's the Madden cover has been for 2 decades now. But let's talk Ed Oliver here. This one absolutely surprised me. I've been going on radio show after radio show talking about Ed Oliver as a trade candidate, as a one-and-done candidate in Buffalo. So, of course, days and hours later, the Bills announce a $45 million guaranteed contract for him. Full disclosure, I am commenting right now without breakdown information, and you know I don't like to do that. I'm simply going to reference where this thing currently stands. But do I believe that $45 million is fully guaranteed at signing? I don't. I'd be shocked if that was the actual case, because to me that means 3 years at $15 per year. Now, let's talk about this average salary. It's $17 million per year on base. Okay, it's 4 for $68, tacked on to the 5th-year option. So I think it's 5 for $78-ish, I believe, in total here. So in that regard, the $45 million practically guaranteed over 3 years is fair. Let's call it fair. Let's just talk about $17 million per year. If we're looking at the other contracts that have hit from defensive tackles thus far, Dexter Lawrence, almost $22 million per year. Deron Payne, $22.5 million per year. Jeffrey Simmons, $23.5 million per year. Okay, obviously well above this Ed Oliver number. Free agent-wise, Javon Hargrave in San Fran, $21 million per year. Delvin Tomlinson, who's got age and wear and tear on his body, 14 and change per year with Cleveland. All right. And we've got 3 more contracts that I believe are about to hit within the next 2.5 months. Chris Jones, probably a restructured deal in Kansas City. That's a $30 million per year contract. That's an Aaron Donald light contract. Quinnen Williams is a light version of that. All right. The last 4 or 5 names I mentioned here have risen his value up to 27 and change. There's a world where he's a $30 million defensive tackle for the Jets, who don't have a lot of mouths to feed right now. And Christian Wilkins, another AFC East defensive tackle for the Miami Dolphins, who's been on par with Ed Oliver in terms of the inconsistencies. He's a tackle monster. He's a run-stopping monster. That generally doesn't pay. But he's done enough over 3+ years here to generate almost $20 million per year in terms of market value, especially with all these other names I've mentioned here and all these other contracts that have hit. So Oliver at 17, and let's say it's 15 with guaranteed AAV. Let's say it's 2 for 30, 3 for 45, and it's heavily backloaded, right? And this was about getting a contract on the books so that there was a viable starting option on the books for 2024 for Buffalo, which doesn't currently exist. It's a lot of 1-year veteran minimum contracts. Players, contributors for sure, but Buffalo sort of they limped into that position this offseason, and I think rightfully so, because there's a world where one of their higher draft picks next year revolves around this position, unless that position needs to be the wide receiver, which is certainly going to be a situation. Am I surprised by this contract? I think I buried that lead already. I'm surprised. So how do I poke holes, or how do I get myself into a positive situation with this? If I'm a Bills fan and I'm freaking out at $45 million guaranteed, that's fine. It's not your money. So, right. If Terry Pagula wants to do this on the day that he breaks ground on $1.6 billion, we'll see. I think this was about motivating a player with money. And I know that sounds crazy, but we see it in the NBA a lot, which I believe is the from a player standpoint, the healthiest financial league we have in America. And we see teams literally throw millions of dollars at players to get them to go, to get them to rise to the next level. There's a world where Sean McDermott, the head coach of the Buffalo Bills, who now takes over this defense after Leslie Frazier stepped aside here temporarily or secretly, wink, wink, forcefully, whatever it is. There's a world where McDermott, who was a defensive line coach in Carolina and made his stake with that very quickly when he moved here to Buffalo, bringing Star Lotulelei on a crazy overpaid contract that they had to buy out eventually. There's a world where we're back at square one with that. And that Ed Oliver is now that new poster boy for this, that they believe that there's still a world where this guy can be in the Jeffrey Simmons conversation, which is a lot to ask. I mean, he is 40% of what Jeffrey Simmons is from a production standpoint right now. That's where he is. He is more of a first-round bust than a first-round extendable player. There's no question. I don't think too many people would argue that point with me. But is the ceiling still there? Sure. Is a change in defensive philosophy probably going to benefit him, especially with a guy in charge now who knows exactly how to run a defensive line? Yep. Are the Bills as a whole, McDermott being the works, are they foreshadowing the possibility that after Quinnen Williams and Chris Jones and Christian Wilkins sign contracts, and 2023 plays out with a better situation for Oliver where he should succeed and should produce, are they foreshadowing a situation where they were going to have to use a franchise tag, a high franchise tag, okay, just to keep the negotiation process intact? And with a team that's all in, that's, marginally around $1 million in cap space now and less next year before restructures, they don't want to get into that situation. They don't want to get themselves into a situation where they're restructuring players just to assign a franchise tag. And I get that. And oh, by the way, if this guy really does take 2 more steps up the ladder this year, which is probably the mindset, it's not 17 million anymore. Okay, it's minimum 22, right? You're back on Darren Payne's number. Wherever Christian Wilkins ends up is a low floor, the foundation, because like I said, there's some comparisons there. There's a lot of comparisons between those 2 players there. And if you've got 2 players at 30 million in Jones and Donald, and Quinnen Williams may be right there, tier 2 is 26 million. So there's a pretty clear path to the Bills not signing this contract, having to squeeze on a defensive tackle franchise tag, and then having to talk themselves on or off the cliff of $25 million a year for Ed Oliver next year because of a 1-year situation. And you know why I'm going down this route with this conversation? Because they just had it with Tremaine Edmunds. like literally verbatim, this exact situation. They didn't really believe that he was the guy for years because the decision-making wasn't there. The run stopping wasn't there. It just wasn't a complete package, even though that's certainly what he was drafted to be, the center of that defense and the total package player. He put it together at the end of year 4 and certainly through his 5th-year option year last season. He put it all together. And Buffalo for sure wanted to keep that player around. But they knew, because they didn't have him under contract, that A, they weren't going to be able to squeeze that franchise tag in. They didn't even try a transition tag. And B, that they were going to get crushed on the open market and free agency. And the Chicago Bears crushed them. 4 for $72, $50 million fully guaranteed at signing. Okay, Buffalo's not touching that. They don't want round 2 of that. And, if you think the defensive tackle is worth more than the inside linebacker, right now it's pretty much pound for pound. Okay, Roquan Smith and Tremaine Edmunds both destroyed that inside linebacker market, that off-ball linebacker market this offseason. Not going to slow down. There's great players out there. All right? But you're talking $20 million a year versus what could be 25 to 30 for tier 2 for a pass rushing defensive tackle. All Ed Oliver has to do is increase his pass rush production. Okay. Everything else is at least in the conversation with these names, the Paynes, the Dexter Lawrences, the Hargraves, the Christian Wilkins. And he's a 20 million plus per year player, minimum. And like I said, when it's all said and done after 2023, 20 becomes 25 pretty quickly in this league, as we've seen with quarterback money, as we've seen with wide receiver money, kind of overnight. So the Bills are simply betting on the fact that they can structure a defense that allows him to produce more. And that if this guy will agree to a deal right now in the current market for his current value, which it is, I've got him at 11, but let's be frank about what a first round pick is going to get. Okay. They had to go to this route, probably 15 million per year on guarantees, just to get him to think about it. And he took it. Is it a disaster for the next 2 seasons, right? 24 and 25? Are they overpaying $5 million extra this year on guarantees and $30 million totally guaranteed over the next 3 seasons? Maybe, but it's a risk they want to take. Because if it does work out, even if it's average, that's what this contract says. This contract says you have not exceeded expectations and you are not a top of the market player at your position. This contract says you are an average player at your position, but based on who you are coming into this league and based on what we think we can get out of you, your ceiling is worth $45 million practically guaranteed to us. That's all it says. Okay, that's all it says. Jeffrey Simmons got 60. Daron Payne got 60. Dexter Lawrence got 60. Those are the numbers. Chris Jones is going to get at least 60 on 2 years. He's going to get 3 for 92 for 60. Quinnen Williams is probably going to get more than 60 million practically guaranteed because of his age. So that's the top number, the 60 million. So is 45 too crazy? No. 45 says you're average and we think you can be above average. That's it. So Bills fans, I'm trying to talk you off a cliff here. The timing's weird. There's a world where They're using this Ed Oliver extension to free up $4 or $5 million of cap space to fit in Leonard Floyd, the contract we heard about this morning, which will be official by the end of the day. That's understandable. Again, the Bills are running out like $1 million of space, razor thin margins. So there was going to be some up and down. And at the end of the day, and I've said this over and over, I said this on Buffalo shows, on national shows, Brandon Beane's not a restructure guy. And he's made about a half dozen cap conversions this offseason, which has to be grinding him. He's probably grinding pens into his desk right now doing this. He hates it. It's just not his philosophy. He said it out loud. So rather than do that to fit Leonard Floyd in, and rather than do that to fill out your offseason roster, he'd rather just pay a player. Okay, if the Pagulas were ready to put up this money, and they did, for Ed Oliver, kind of a wait and see, $45 million, that's a way better way for Brandon Beane to establish cap space, fortify a roster spot for next year, and take a 2-year flyer on a player that should work out if Sean McDermott can fix that defensive line, which has been a revolving door mess for the better part of 3 seasons now. So that's the grand scheme of things. Again, we will break this contract down more, and I'll do a kind of a comparison like I did, but with actual numbers between Oliver's deal and Lawrence's deal and Simmons' deal. And I think that Quinn Williams contract's coming soon. Real side note, little asterisk on that one. Aaron Rodgers is still a minimum salary player for the Jets right now, literally $1.165 million. It's been a blessing for the Jets because the cap is absolute peanuts. So it's helped them operate. Not that they've made splashy signings and things like that, but because that exists right now, you can fit in a pretty nice, fresh, sizable Quinn Williams contract and then deal with Aaron Rodgers because there's no rush. Nothing has to happen until week 1 with that option bonus. And they're going to rip it all up and start over. So Aaron Rodgers is affording the Jets the time and the cap room to operate with some of these contracts. And I have a feeling that the Williams deal is coming. But if they're trying to Ed Oliver that situation, let's put it that way, they got a long time coming with this. Because like I said, that's a Chris Jones light, an Aaron Jones light contract. And in my opinion, it's going to be the third biggest defensive tackle contract in the history of football. That's what the Jets are facing right now. They have all the assets and the resources to do it. It's simply a matter of will they give in and give this guy the money he's due. All right, sticking with the Bills here quickly. They broke ground on their stadium this morning. I'm going to highlight some of these numbers real quick. It's scheduled to open in 2026. It's going to cost, we think, $1.4 billion, obviously with inflation. And we've all had work done in our house. You know how this works. It starts off at $5,000 and ends up at $5,500 pretty quickly. Who knows where this number ends up? Most of these stadiums go over budget. Let's be perfectly frank. The big number here is $850 million, which is the taxpayer buy-in, the public funding for this deal. It's the largest public funded number in the history of NFL stadiums, which is wild because Buffalo is and has been one of the smallest markets in the NFL for forever. Okay, so I wouldn't say it's a sore spot around here because everybody around here locally is excited for the new stadium. I think there are a pretty strong contingent of people that didn't think it was necessary, but you know how this works. The NFL gets on you and, guarantees you a draft will happen here or something like that. It's not going to be a Super Bowl here, but a draft for sure. And you start to rally around it a little bit. So the 850 is the big number, and that's not going anywhere. I can guarantee you that. That's been signed, sealed, and delivered. Some comparisons. If I just went back to 2010 with NFL stadiums and their costs and public funding here. Vegas, Allegiant Stadium, cost $2 billion, right around there at least, with $750 coming in public funding, and that's Vegas. Okay, so Buffalo's got $100 million on them in public funding coming. SoFi Stadium in LA, kind of the NFL headquarters now, right? $5 billion to make it. Not a dollar came from the public. LA is LA, and they operate on a different wavelength than the rest of the world here. Atlanta, Mercedes-Benz Stadium cost 1.6 with $700 million. So again, cost more, public paid less. U.S. Bank in Minnesota, they've had their issues with it, but $1.1 billion, only $350 of public funding on that one. So that's a really nice deal for the taxpayers. And I believe I just read they've already paid that lease off, or the loan they took, the construction loan they took out. like some 20 years early. So taxpayers are actually getting refunded because the plan, the accrued plan that was built into this thing has been expedited and ripped up. So what the taxpayers thought they were going to be paying over the next 20 years, 2 decades, is now gone and put away. So the Vikings have actually saved their public a ton of money, literally a ton of money. So that's good news from there. Maybe that can happen in Buffalo. I'm going to guess, based on the landscape I see around me and the economy I see around me, that's not going to be the case, but you never know. Levi Stadium in San Fran, $1.3 billion, only $114 million publicly funded. There was a ton of private loan there, as you might imagine. It's a suite-driven kind of stadium. And MetLife in New York, just like LA, $1.6 to build it, $0 publicly funded. Tons of private equities built into that and sold some stakes in it to allow that stadium to be built in 2010. Coming up, Tennessee has announced a $2 billion plus stadium in Nashville. $500 million of that's going to be publicly funded, at least right now. That's a phenomenal number. I mean, phenomenal. To go 20% on that, that's just ridiculous. Chicago's coming. Washington's coming. Both have major logistical question marks. At least in Washington's case, the ownership is figured out. So negotiations with real estate and Maryland and things like that should improve. And that should come together pretty quickly. And that, by the way, that should be one of the biggest stadiums in the country. One of the best stadiums in the country, I should say, because of proximity, location, because of where it is. And that's a franchise that has to be resurrected. It's just too important to the NFL not to be. Chicago is working out either to go residential or more urban, which the Bills had to go through for quite a bit. There was a large contingency who to this day remain that wanted that stadium to be in the city of Buffalo, downtown. And the unbelievable cost, the logistical cost to, reroute highways and build in parking and reroute mass transit. And there was just so much into it. I mean, the scopes were incredible. You were talking about another $1 billion minimum just in getting this thing drivable and usable and yada yada. So keeping it in Orchard Park, where the land was owned by the county, and literally building this thing across the street saved hundreds of millions of dollars. So while it's a great idea to urbanize these kind of things, and there are some cities that have phenomenal layouts with these, to build a round peg in a square hole in this day and age, in this climate, with construction costs and everything going on, it's just not feasible. There's a conversation about how big these stadiums should be in the first place. And, with gambling and the streaming experience, which is where a lot of these dollars are going, by the way, right? Are fans really motivated to get to stadiums that much anymore? I think that's going to be a big conversation. It has been for a while, but is that conversation going to continue to pick up speed? We'll see. We'll see. I think the A's conversation in Vegas, which is, I believe, about 30,000 on that stadium max, that's probably right. I think we should be downsizing the max capacity, which, if you start selling them out, now they become exclusive seats. Now there's a chance that you can't even get a ticket to see the Oakland A's in Las Vegas. We'll see. Yeah, we'll see. Speaking of which, let's transition. The Oakland A's released Jesus Aguilar yesterday, officially, after DFAing him a couple of days back. He had a $3 million salary. He had the 5th highest salary on the team at the time. All right. You've been beaten to death with the A's financial conversation. But it's worth discussing as these Vegas conversations happen. There are a lot of smart people that I follow that have thrown some threads out there recently that said this Vegas stuff is just smoke and mirrors, and that it is simply to ramp up positive energy and improve the marketability of this franchise because the owner actually wants to sell. And there are buyers lined up, and it would stay on the West Coast and blah, blah, blah. And that is the genesis of this conversation. I think relocation still is possible. I will say this, though. I think there's a minute but possible chance that the Oakland A's are simply sold, that negotiations with Oakland restart with the new ownership, and that actually has some legs to stay in Oakland, to find a new stadium, again, a smaller, comfortable stadium in Oakland that desperately needs a professional sports team because they have been gutted with basketball and football, and that new owner sees the proximity to San Francisco and where it is as value. And that Vegas, they're not going to get screwed, don't worry. We'll go ahead with that stadium right on the strip there by the Wynn, and we'll push for an expansion team, which I believe Major League Baseball still wants. And Nashville and Vegas as, an AL and NL expansion team over the next couple of years, there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing. So I do think that possibility exists. And I've read some pretty smart threads from people that say this is in the works. There's literally a buyer sitting there waiting for Oakland to turn the corner on this entire situation. And I would not be surprised. By the way, I think I'd be pleased with that outcome. Oakland remains. They just get a new stadium and an owner that's motivated to start to build this team. And Vegas gets a team, puts that nice stadium in there, expands their professional sports prowess. And baseball goes to 32 teams with Nashville getting the other one. I think that's logical. So probably will never happen because that's not how professional sports ever works. But wanted to throw that out there as well. The Oakland A's have a $59 million payroll, which, by the way, kind of high for them over the past decade. They've been in the 30s. Last year they were in the 44s. There was a 90 in 2011 or a 2021, when they were pushing. They've done this before. 11 million of this is on their IL right now. 4.5 million of this has been bought out money in season here. All right. They've got 9 million of guaranteed money in the minor leagues right now. Just players they don't even want up here because they're trying not to win games, obviously. Their 26-man payroll is second lowest to the Reds, who have just been decimated by injuries, much of that Joey Votto salary. But they're a $42 million 26-man payroll. They're a $59 million total financial roster right now. Obviously the lowest in the league. It's the lowest by $7 million. It's almost $300 million less than the Mets. It's $250 less than the Yankees. We know how this works right now. You've heard it before. My point is this, and by the way, they're terrible, and they're trying to be terrible. They're the worst team in baseball by 1.5 miles. There's a .197 winning percentage right now. So anything, under 3, not great. Under 2, you are tanking. I guess they're still spending $60 million, right? Is there a silver lining in that? That if they're going to be this bad, at least they have to spend some money to be this bad because they're not spending 30. Like I said, there were a few years here in the 40s and 30s for this franchise on total payroll. And not too long ago either. So has the new CBA helped? I think so. I think the increase in minimum salary, the jump up to 26-man, not 25-man. Now, they're not even carrying a 40-man roster right now. They're carrying a 39. And that's perfectly within their right. But they are trying like hell to lose ball games. And they're still spending $60 million, $80 million in tax payroll. So I think we're taking the right steps forward. Should we have a 350 and a 60? Should that be the range of payrolls? No. We talked about this ad nauseum during the CBA negotiations. They did not implement a floor. I believe that the pressure from the sport around it might help because look, we can say Twitter's the worst. It's the worst. Twitter has made decisions in professional sports. There's no question in my mind that ownership and front offices, maybe not actual GMs, but, the people that it's their job to research and to A/B test and to gauge fan experiences and reactions and marketability, right? And all the valuations that come with that. From being able to sell advertising, et cetera, et cetera. All that's extremely fragile right now because of the social media era we live in. Baltimore got their shit together. All right. They're a $66 million payroll, second lowest in the league. But they've done this through the draft, the absolute hardest way to do this. And you know that within the next 18 months, Dan's been on here talking to me about it, they're going to pour a couple $100 million into their youth. It's going to happen. Okay, Adley Russian's going to get a historic catching contract. It's going to happen. I imagine some of the pitching that's developing into this team is going to get paid at some point in time, probably the closer first. So they're quickly going to be $100 million before it's all said and done on the payroll, which is going to make them, 23rd, 24th. High for them, but in a healthy place for the league. It's going to take Oakland because the draft pool is just not there. They're essentially starting back over. And, you can read all the minor league prospect pool contracts you want. They don't have what Tampa has and what Cleveland has and even what Pittsburgh and Baltimore have. And Cincinnati, who have started to turn a corner as well. Those are your bottom payrolls in the league right now. Oakland is in a different world. And it's because the ownership has simply given up. So we can talk about the fact that they're not trying, but not only are they not trying to spend money right now, even though $60 million is still a good chunk of change. To me, they haven't even put the effort in to get themselves back on the right track, the track that Houston took years to get back onto. Baltimore, Pittsburgh now. The Cincinnati track, which has only been a couple of years. I mean, that team was competitive 3-4 years ago. They had to rip all the veterans out. They're letting Joey Votto retire kind of honorably. And they're going to get themselves infused with a couple of great pitchers and certainly a couple of position players who are already on the roster right now. Oakland's not on that track. And that's what scares me the most. And I don't think a relocation is going to change that. I do think an ownership change is going to change that immediately. It'll invigorate everything around that organization, especially if the plan is to keep them in Oakland, start negotiating real estate for a new stadium, and actually revamp the current process versus starting over and hoping for the best. So back to that rumor and the threads I've been reading. That's why I'm rooting for that version of it. Because I think, and we've seen this in basketball, right? Rich owner, male or female, comes in, ignites everything with A, money, with B, energy, with C, actual quick decision making. Let's not just run the process out. Let's get a plan. Let's get a GM that understands how to do this and get this thing going. Oakland needs a lot of that, and they need it to start from the top down. So it's not corrupt like the Washington Commanders, but the need for change is as demanding. And I would expect both those franchises to at least start to turn the corner if Oakland can figure out this ownership situation. Okay. I have launched a new series. I have not yet published. I do have a new SpotTrack.com article live called NFL Contracts. I went through every single team and I identified one contract that for one reason or another scares me. So for instance, I mentioned Tremaine Edmonds with the Bears. Great player. He's 25 years old. Could be there for the next 10 years. Could be the center of that defense for the next 10 years. But $50 million fully guaranteed for that player. Buffalo wasn't getting involved. The Bears did it because they're the Bears right now. Is that going to play out? We'll see. Obviously, Deshaun Watson's on this list. Obviously, Cam Robinson, suspended for PEDs, is on this list. I've got Von Miller on this list. I've got Daniel Jones on this list. I've got 3 or 4 quarterbacks. I got a couple of kickers. I've got a couple of players that were acquired via trade that I don't think are going to pan out. And I got a couple of young rookies because A, they were the best option, right? Because I had to go through 50, 60 contracts. And in some cases, there are teams really not spending money that would warrant a concern with a contract. So maybe it's more about place on the roster or place they were drafted. I've got a couple of rookies on this list, but one player from every single team, a contract that carries at least some form of question mark heading into 2023, and my thoughts on why. That's live right now on SpotTrack.com. Here's what's coming. I pivoted from tiers. I was kind of sick of the tier stuff. I'm going through every single position, and I've gone through 3 right now. And I'm basically running a journal for you and for me, because it's a good way for me to recap the offseason. I'm calling it the Movement Journal. the positional movement journal. Maybe it's an outline more than a journal, but I'm literally running team by team on a positional standpoint and breaking down everything that's happened. So for instance, with the quarterback position, if we just take Green Bay, okay, it's about everything that's happened at the quarterback position this offseason in chronological order, okay? Which, if you had re-signing Danny Etling as the number one option, you would be correct. That's the first thing the Green Bay did, okay? And what I'm doing is I'm labeling these things with projected outcomes. So Danny Etling has been resigned to compete for a reserve spot, the QB3 role, maybe a practice squad spot. They traded Aaron Rodgers to the Jets. They then extended Jordan Love, and they drafted Sean Clifford, who by the way, right now is the QB2 for Green Bay. Penn State's Sean Clifford is the option behind Jordan Love. Take what you want with that to the bank. But that's the deal. I'm giving you guaranteed dollars, chronological outcomes of transactions, and my thoughts, a quick analysis point about where this is going to end up. So with the quarterback stuff, it's sort of vanilla. All right. Many of these you'll remember. Some of these you won't care about. Some of you may not remember that Pittsburgh re-signed Mason Rudolph and extended Mitchell Trubisky because that kind of got lost in the weeds the past couple of weeks here. But there are teams that have added a lot of depth. And by the way, with the announcement of the QB3 that you can bring up every single week on a Sunday as long as he's on your practice squad, I think we're going to see more movement here. So I may have to readdress this if teams like Green Bay want to add a veteran option that they can hold on the practice squad, because that's possible now. There's no experience limit on the P squad. So, for instance, Cam Newton can be on Green Bay's practice squad. Yada, yada. Carson Wentz can be on a practice squad and brought up for Sunday as a QB3. That's going to be a bit of a late swell in transactions at this position. When we get to the running back, and I have finished the running back piece, it's bonkersville. All right. And I'm basically saying if I project this player to be top 3 on the depth chart, they're competing for a starting role. And if I think they're 4 through 8 on the depth chart, they're competing for a reserve role. So I'm just kind of prefacing you how I'm doing this. And I'd love your thoughts. If you think I should add, subtract to this kind of piece, and this might be an annual off-season recap piece for me. And maybe it's something we do with all these sports and go kind of position by position with all these sports as a recap, a look back. We do this preceding free agency to give you, the best available players, what we think they might cost. And then we talk about a few of them, right? The big contracts and maybe some of the more surprising names, but then we leave a lot of it in the weeds. It's especially fantasy owners, right? And that's kind of where I'm thinking with this. It's going to matter. The 4th running back on the Philadelphia Eagles is going to matter because I think that's going to be Boston Scott. Okay. DeAndre Swift, Rashad Penny, Kenneth Gainwell, Boston Scott. It's going to happen. How many running backs got drafted you don't even know about, but they're going to be contributors, right? 3rd, 4th round players. Hell yeah. A couple of 6th rounders. They're going to play this year. All right. It's just the nature of that position. How many of these franchise tag players are actually going to sign their franchise tag? That's going to be a conversation with running backs. And I'll go on with wide receivers and tight ends, et cetera, down the line. So it's a big piece. It's a lot of work. It's a great way for me to recap in my brain all these transactions and contracts I've been filing through for the past couple of months. But I think it's a nice way to quickly establish yourself, like I said, from a fantasy perspective, from a divisional perspective. Oh, I forgot that Leonard Fournette's even available. That that Tampa Bay released him and replaced him with Chase Edmonds for basically a vet minimum contract. All those things are going to be popping back into our heads with these little outlines. So that's the big project I'm taking with me in June here from an NFL recap standpoint. I think it's going to affect some people because, like I said, there's a fantasy aspect to it. There's a 90-man roster aspect to it. I'm mentioning UDFAs and maybe highlighting some that have a chance to stick because we've seen more and more of that every year. But it's kind of a nice way to look back and project where we're headed as the 90-man roster cuts get to us in about a month here. 6 weeks. We got a long summer ahead of us here. So looking back a little bit, but it's a big outline piece broken down by position. And that will start to hit the Spotrac.com waves probably midweek. So look out for that. Okay. Good luck to those betting the Miami Heat. I think it's a good plus 225 bet right now because that team is not going away and they will not get outcoached. For Scott Allen, my name is Mike Ginnitti. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Spotrac Podcast.